Hey, good morning and welcome to The Gathering. My name is Jake and I'm glad you joined us. What we've got for you this morning is another part in our series called Doubting. Over the last 4 weeks, we've been talking through individual stories, and we actually started all the way back in Psalms, and we realized we're not the first people to have questions or doubts about our faith and about God. In fact, we're not alone in our questions, but other people today still have questions too. Then we read from Judges chapter 6 about a guy named Gideon, and we realized that God meets us where we are with our questions. He doesn't shame us for our questions, but He actually brings us along a journey and begins to answer them for us. But that's not always the case, as we learned when we read about Job and his terrible season of life where he lost everything of value, including his family. In fact, with Job, what we realized was sometimes our questions don't get answered. But that doesn't mean that we can't continue to trust God. Then last week we wrapped things up by reading a story about a woman named Esther and her life journey that was full of surprises, but all along the way God provided her with faithful people to help her understand her journey and follow God. Here's what we want to do now, is this week we want to start answering some of your questions. In fact, this week and next week, we're going to be answering questions that you've submitted, and you can actually still submit some if you'd like through the link in our social media and on our newsletter and even at the end of this video. But the questions have been kind of divided into two categories. Today, we're talking all about your faith, talking about how do you know what you believe, how do you know what God's will is for you. And next week, we're going to dig into things in our faith that maybe need to be defended or answered. And that's a big theological conversation called apologetics. So we're going to be looking into things like, how do we know that Christianity is right? How do we know that God exists? Those kind of questions are next week. This week, we're going to dig into questions all about your personal faith. So let's get started. So our first question is this: how do you know if you truly believe in your heart? Let me set you at ease right away by going, I think you're asking this question from a heart that does believe or longs to believe. You actually love and long after Christ, and really what you're wondering more is, do I believe enough? And I would start by saying our faith and our belief is not some Disney magic that you have to get just right. It's not true love's first kiss, or if I believe in my heart enough, it'll come true. It's not that. And I would also say this: if you were to get this question, I'm not sure where yours came from. Maybe it came from the fact that you know being a Christian has to do with belief. Even John 3:16, the most famous verse in the Bible, talks about belief. But if you were to type in and you were to start looking for where does it say believe in your heart, my guess is you would land on Romans chapter 10, verse 9, which says this: if you openly declare that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is by believing in your heart that you are made right with God, and it is by openly declaring your faith that you are saved. So here I have a silver coin. You can see it's got a stagecoach on the front, and then it's got a break on the back. And if this was sitting on my desk and you came in, you may just see the stagecoach side. And maybe I fiddled with it one day and then I left it face down, and somebody else came in and they saw the scored backside. And then you could both describe the coin, not knowing you were describing the exact same coin. And I share that because this verse, a lot of people hold on to the believing in your heart part, and they don't talk too much about the confessing with your mouth or declaring with your mouth part. But here's the thing. They're the same side, or they're opposite sides of the same coin. The believing in your heart is the internal change, the personal part of your faith, whereas the declaring or speaking with your mouth is the external proclamation of your faith. And so we would begin to look at both of those things to know what you really believe. So with that, I would start on the internal part, and I would ask the question, how's your heart? Does it long to be with Christ? Does it long to be with your Christian brothers and sisters? Are you becoming more like Christ, which we're going to define in a moment? Then I would go, what about the way that you speak and live your life? If I were to first meet you, would I know that you're a Christian, or would I be surprised to learn that information? Right? Would it be like years down the road you told me you were going to church, and I'd be like, how long have you gone to church? Right, there's a joke that goes around that says you know a CrossFitter and a vegan because they tell you within 5 minutes of meeting you. And not that our faith needs to be like that, although it might be for you. There is some level of when people meet us and know us, they should know that we're Christian. Right, Jeremiah, the prophet in the Old Testament, talks about this idea that the Israelites, while they're in captivity, should live like the people around them and should live for the benefit of the city they're in, knowing that in the long run it would benefit them too. But here's the thing, Jeremiah doesn't say, and go worship whoever they worship and do everything evil that they're doing. He still encourages them to be Israelites and be set apart and be God's people. That's the way that we get to live. Go be a good student. Go be a great athlete. Go get your first job and work hard. But people need to know that you're a Christian too. Don't be afraid to mention your faith, bring up your faith, and start to talk about it with your friends, at lunch, at school, wherever it may be. Because here's what I would ask. If your faith is only on Sunday and Wednesday night, is it really a part of your life? If your faith is only something you do when you're around other Christians, has it really become part of your life? See, we can't just dig into our internal change. We would also need to look at the external change too. The last thing that I would say is this. You need to check for fruit in your life. And here's how the Bible describes it. In John chapter 15, it says, a vine can't produce fruit if it's not connected to the life-giving branch. Just like we can't produce fruit or become more Christ-like if we're not connected to Jesus. So if you have no fruit in your life, then the question would be, do you actually believe? And so there's three kinds of fruit that the New Testament talks about. One of them is our knowledge and understanding of God. So I'd have to ask the question, do you feel like you understand and know God better now than you did a week ago? What about a month ago? What about a year ago? Another thing is the New Testament talks about the fact that we would share our faith, that we would lead people into a relationship with Christ. And so the question then would be, when was the last time you had a conversation about your faith with a friend? Was it maybe pre-COVID when you could actually have a friend stay the night and you had one of those classic middle school, high school, late night conversations where faith came up? Was it maybe after school one day as you were walking home, or have you ever even had one of those conversations? And the last thing that I would ask is, what does it look like on the inside? How have you been changing? Are you living more like Christ? Galatians would describe that as somebody who has love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Do those words describe you? Are those words starting to describe you more? That's how I would tell if I had fruit in my life. And if any of those things are true, then your belief is well on its way to being very healthy. So our second question is this. How do you know if a gut feeling or an intuition is from God or if it's something else? And so here's what I'd say. There's a ton to unpack in this question. But I'm going to start kind of at the beginning with something real simple. I don't think that God's will authors every moment of our life. For example, I had a perfect bar for breakfast this morning and it was delicious. But I don't think I'm outside of God's will because I didn't have oatmeal. You know what I'm saying? And if we took it a little bit bigger, we could maybe look at something like dating and leading into marriage. And here's the thing, I'm about to crush all of the Disney movies and I'm probably going to crush your heart as well. But I don't think there's a the one for everybody. In fact, I don't think there's a the one for anybody. I don't think Kaylee's the one. Because here's the deal. Let's just play this out in three possible scenarios. Number one, if there is the one for you and for me, all it takes is one person in all of existence to throw that entire system off. See what I'm saying? What if Kaylee isn't the one? That means I've got another the one and she's got another the one. Are they supposed to remain single? Do they marry each other, hopefully? Do they marry whoever they want and steal somebody else's the one? And the whole system comes crashing down. But then that would force something else. That would force God to decide everybody's partner. And see, that means he would have to author all the bad parts that happen in marriage too, because here's the thing, if one person was outside of God's will and that's why they got a divorce, well then they stole that person's the one and we end up right back to the same problem, right? There's this issue of, Does God pick all of these things? Or there's option number 3. God gives us some wisdom to live by. Right, all the way back in Genesis chapter 2, he says this. He talks about men and women getting married, and he says, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united as one. That becomes the baseline for marriage, right? This idea that a guy and a gal meet and they get married, and they are married one to one for a lifetime. And then God describes it in further detail in Corinthians when he says that we shouldn't be unequally yoked. That meaning we need to find another Christian, somebody who has similar beliefs and passions as us, so that we can move forward together. And then once you do get married, you can go to Ephesians 5 and other places where you learn how to be married and how to live well in marriage. But there's no game of hopefully I found the one, right? And I think all of life works pretty similar to that. From the beginning, God created us in his image. He created us to be like him, to make decisions, to fill the earth. And by the way, that doesn't just mean with babies, that also means with be creative. And as you get into the New Testament and you start reading about what it looks like to be a Christian now, you would begin to understand that God gives us genuine talents and gifts and a mission. And so you'd have to ask these questions. What are you talented? What are you good at? What gifts from the Spirit do you have? And you could read in 1 Corinthians 12 or Romans 12 about those gifts. And then you go, what is my mission from God? Matthew 20:19, go therefore and make disciples of all men, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And outside of that, man, the world is your playground. Here's the thing. What would you do? What do you need to do now? How do you know if you're inside of God's will? What about this one? Let's say you are a good track runner. You're a great runner. You're very fast. Here's what you could do. Yeah, go ahead and prioritize that time after school. Join the track team, run. And then in the midst of that, don't be afraid to be the guy who prays. Don't be afraid to be the girl who asks about spiritual stuff after practice. Because what you could do is use a gift and talent you have to do something you enjoy, and you can bring God glory in it. What about this? If you're a little bit older and you're wondering about college, where do you go next? And you've got all kinds of options. And you can go, you know what? I think I need to strengthen my faith, so I'm going to go to a Christian school so that I can do a better job of carrying his word to multiple people. Or you can go, I feel so strong, I'm ready to be a light on another campus. And either way, you can bring God glory. I went to Liberty University, and the mission of the school at Liberty is this. They want to make the best businessmen, lawyers, doctors, nurses, teachers, any profession, you name it. They want to make the best of the best. And then they want those people to go get that job, live peaceably among their neighbors, and share their faith with everybody that they come in contact with. So what do you do if you think, okay, but God has this one moment for me? Here's the last part that I would add, and that's this. Romans 12:2 says that we are transformed by the renewing of our minds so that we can understand God's will, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. That means, one, you need to engage with God. Read God's word. Pray regularly and get in tune with his Spirit. That's how you're going to know maybe if God is guiding you to something. But again, I don't think God guides us in everything. The last thing I would say is seek wise counsel. Last week we said God gives us people to help us along our journey, to give us wise advice. And they may not go, God has this specifically for you, but they could go, here's how you could honor God with that decision. If you don't remember, last week we asked, who was your counselor? Who was your confidant? Who was your coach? Who's your mentor? Who's your cheerleader or fan? Who's your pastor? Who's your prayer support? God gave us all of those people so that we could help test ideas out, so that we could run ideas by other people who have gone before us, by people who have good, solid faith, so that we can make a right, God-honoring decision. So there you have it. Hopefully the answer to those two questions is helpful for you. Hopefully if you had a question that was similar, you got something out of it. And here's the thing, my encouragement to you this week is begin to engage both of those. How do you know if you truly believe? How do you know what God's will is? You start to get to know God. I don't know if you got that in those questions. Spend time in his word, spend time praying, and spend time engaging with people who are a little bit older, a little bit more experienced, and maybe can speak into your life, speak into your faith. All of that is such an important part of what we believe. Next week, again, like we said, we're going to go into some of the apologetic type questions, some of those big questions of faith, like how did God get there in the first place? How do we know that Christianity is right among countless other religions? And just because I'm a Christian, does that mean that I have to reject science? I'm looking forward to it, and I hope that you'll join us next week. With that, let me pray for you, and then go ahead, stick around, and join in on worship. Hear Chris's answers to a couple of additional questions. Let me pray for you. God, thank you so much that you're not afraid of our questions, but that you give us ways to find answers. God, today I hope that the answers that I got to provide will bring peace to some, will help some understand you better and feel closer to you. And God, I pray that next week does the same. This week, Lord, can we engage with you? Can we grow closer to you? And can we grow closer to the people that you've placed into our lives? In your son's name we pray. Amen. All right, we'll see you next week.